Imagine spending your entire career protecting your state's most precious resource, designing your dream home with every conservation measure possible, only to watch strangers splash around in your private sanctuary like they owned it. That's what happened to me, Michael Chen, when an out-of-control HOA president decided my pool wasn't just a violation, it was community property. What they didn't realize is that taking on the state water commissioner was about to become their biggest regret. Before we dive into this wild story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let me know what state or country you call home. Your support means everything to our channel. For 15 years I'd worked my way up through the Department of Water Resources. Starting as a field inspector, I eventually became the youngest state water commissioner in our history. Water conservation wasn't just my job, it was my passion. In a state plagued by drought cycles, I believed every drop saved mattered. When I finally saved enough to build my dream home, I chose a beautiful 3-acre property just outside the city limits. The land backed up to a small creek and offered the perfect balance of privacy and natural beauty. The house itself was modest, 3 bedrooms, energy-efficient windows, and solar panels covering the south-facing roof. But the crown jewel was the pool. "You're really going all out on this design," my contractor had said, reviewing my detailed specifications. I nodded, pointing to the specialized filtration system. This reduces chemical use by 80% while maintaining perfect water quality. The pool wasn't just beautiful, it was a showcase of cutting-edge water conservation technology. The specialized circulation system, rainwater recovery integration, and custom cover that prevented evaporation made it 40% more efficient than standard pools. I'd even installed sensors that monitored water chemistry and consumption in real time. My oasis was complete just as summer arrived. Each morning before heading to the office, I'd swim laps in water that sparkled like liquid sapphire against the limestone deck. Evenings were spent on my patio, watching the sunset paint the water in gold and crimson. This was exactly the sanctuary I'd worked toward my entire adult life. The property sat at the edge of Sycamore Hills, an upscale development with manicured lawns and colonial-style homes that all seemed to have been stamped from the same blueprint. A line of oak trees separated my natural landscaping from their perfectly trimmed hedges and regulation mailboxes. The first few weeks were peaceful. Some neighbors waved when they saw me checking my mailbox. Others stopped to compliment the native plant landscaping that required minimal watering. Everything was perfect until the drought restrictions came down. As water commissioner, I had reluctantly signed off on Stage 2 water conservation measures for our county. Lawn watering was limited to twice weekly, car washing at home was prohibited, and most relevant to my story, filling new swimming pools was temporarily banned. My pool had been completed just before the restrictions took effect, and its conservation features meant it actually used less water than the typical Sycamore Hills lawn. But I knew the optics could be challenging. Conservation measures are never popular, especially with those who believe their property should remain untouched by regulation. One evening, as I was adjusting my pool cover, I noticed them, 3 people standing at the edge of my property, pointing toward my backyard. A woman in a crisp white pantsuit seemed to be leading the discussion, gesturing emphatically toward my pool while the others nodded. Something about their body language sent a chill through me, despite the warm evening. The woman noticed me watching and offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I raised a hand in tentative greeting, but they turned and walked away, heads bent in conversation. That night I received an email notification from the water department about unusual complaints regarding my property. Someone had reported my pool as a flagrant violation of water restrictions and demanded it be drained immediately. The complaint had been automatically routed to my department since it fell under water conservation jurisdiction. I stared at my computer screen, baffled. My pool wasn't in violation. It had been filled before restrictions were implemented, and its conservation features made it a model of responsible water use. Who would file such a complaint? And more importantly, how did they get the exact measurements of my pool's water capacity? Little did I know this was just the first drop in what would become a flood of harassment from the Sycamore Hills HOA, a group that had absolutely no authority over my property. By the time this fight was over, they'd learn exactly who they were messing with and what happens when you declare war on the State Water Commissioner. The morning after spotting those strangers at the edge of my property, I was inspecting my irrigation system when I heard the distinct crunch of expensive heels on gravel. Looking up, I saw the woman in the white pantsuit marching directly toward me with the confidence of someone who expects the world to bend to her will. "Good morning," I called out, straightening up from my flower bed. "Can I help you?" She stopped at what she must have considered a respectable distance, though she was already well onto my property. Up close, her pantsuit was even more immaculate, not a wrinkle in sight. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore the kind of smile that seemed practiced in front of a mirror. "I'm Patricia Wilcox," she announced, as if the name should mean something to me. "President of the Sycamore Hills Homeowners Association." I wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded politely. "Michael Chen, nice to meet you." Patricia's gaze slid past me to my pool, her expression souring slightly. "I'm here about several concerns the board has regarding your property, Mr. Chen." "Concerns," I repeated, glancing around at my well-maintained yard. "What concerns exactly?" She pulled a tablet from her designer handbag and began scrolling through what appeared to be a checklist. "For starters, your pool. We're in the middle of severe water restrictions, yet you've installed a new swimming pool." "My pool was completed before the restrictions went into effect," I explained calmly, "and it's actually a model of water conservation. It uses significantly less water than standard pools." Patricia's smile tightened. "Nevertheless, the appearance is problematic. Many Sycamore Hills residents can see your pool from their properties, and it sends the wrong message during a drought." I took a deep breath. "Ms. Wilcox—" "Patricia, please," she interjected with a plastic smile. "Patricia, I understand your concern, but my property isn't part of Sycamore Hills. Your HOA has no jurisdiction here." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Technical boundaries aside, we all have a responsibility to maintain community standards. Your pool is visible from our properties and affects our values." "I appreciate your perspective," I said, "but my pool was legally installed, meets all county requirements, and actually exceeds conservation guidelines." Patricia's smile vanished completely. "Mr. Chen, perhaps I haven't made myself clear. The Sycamore Hills Covenant explicitly states that all properties visible from our community must maintain aesthetic and functional harmony." I crossed my arms. "That covenant can only apply to properties within your HOA. My deed is separate, and there's no easement or jurisdiction that extends to my land." "Regulations can change," she replied, her voice dropping to a colder tone, "especially when it's for the greater good of the community." Something about the way she said it, like a threat wrapped in civic concern, raised my hackles. "Patricia, I've worked in water management for 15 years. I designed this pool specifically to minimize water usage. It actually conserves more water than any typical lawn in your development." She waved her hand dismissively. "Technical details don't matter to property values, Mr. Chen. What matters is perception." "Well, perception isn't legally binding," I countered. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Patricia didn't move. Instead, she glanced around my property with the air of someone cataloguing deficiencies. "Your fence is also below regulation height, and those native plants look unruly compared to our landscaping standards." "Again," I said, my patience wearing thin, "your regulations don't apply here." "We'll see about that," she replied, tapping something into her tablet. "The board is meeting next week to discuss expansion of our guidelines. You'll be receiving formal notice soon." With that, she turned and marched back toward Sycamore Hills, heels digging little holes into my lawn with each determined step. I stood there, dumbfounded. In 15 years of public service, I'd dealt with angry farmers during water allocations, frustrated city officials during usage restrictions, and corporate lawyers fighting conservation measures. But Patricia Wilcox's entitled certainty that she could control my property left me speechless. 3 days later, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a notice of violation on Sycamore Hills HOA letterhead. The document listed 3 infractions: unauthorized pool installation, insufficient fence height, and non-conforming landscaping. At the bottom was a demand for me to attend the next HOA meeting to discuss remediation options. I almost laughed until I saw the final paragraph. Failure to address these violations may result in daily fines and potential legal action to enforce community standards. This wasn't just inappropriate, it was borderline harassment. I placed the notice in a folder labeled HOA and decided to document everything moving forward. Years of working in government had taught me the value of keeping meticulous records. That evening, as I was grilling on my patio, I noticed a group of people standing at the property line, pointing toward my pool and taking photos. Patricia stood among them, tablet in hand, clearly conducting some kind of inspection from a distance. The battle lines were being drawn, and it was becoming clear that Patricia Wilcox wasn't going to let something as trivial as property rights or legal boundaries stand in her way. After receiving the bogus violation notice, I knew I needed to protect myself. The next morning, I drove to the county records office to obtain official documentation of my property boundaries. The clerk, an older woman named Helen, seemed confused by my request. "Your property isn't part of any HOA, Mr. Chen," she confirmed, pointing to the clearly marked boundaries on the county map. "There's a 20-foot easement along the creek for utility access, but otherwise your land is entirely separate from Sycamore Hills." "Could I get that in writing?" I asked, "with the official county seal?" Helen raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Having trouble with neighbors?" "You could say that," I replied, thinking of Patricia's imperious attitude. Armed with official documentation, I returned home to find fresh footprints leading from the Sycamore Hills side of my property to the pool area. Someone had been on my land while I was gone. That evening, I installed 4 high-definition security cameras covering every approach to my property. If Patricia or her minions came snooping again, I'd have it on video. The following day, my colleague Alex dropped by to help me calibrate some pool sensors for a water conservation study we were conducting. As we worked, I told him about my encounters with Patricia. "Wait, they're trying to claim jurisdiction over your property?" Alex asked, incredulous. "That's not how HOAs work." "I know," I said, adjusting a flow meter, "but Patricia doesn't seem concerned with legal technicalities." Alex frowned. "You should send a formal response rejecting their claim. As water commissioner, you could also remind them of the actual water usage regulations they should be following." "I'd rather not bring my position into this," I said. "It should be enough that they have no legal authority here." Later that afternoon, I received a text from my neighbor Thomas, who lived in Sycamore Hills but had always been friendly. "Thought you should see this," he wrote, attaching a photo of a flyer. My stomach dropped as I read the brightly colored announcement. Sycamore Hills Community Pool Party, Saturday 2 to 6 p.m. Join us at our new community pool facility. Below was my address prominently displayed. "They've been distributing these to every house in the development," Thomas texted. "Thought it seemed off since I know it's your private property." I immediately called the HOA's listed number, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message explicitly stating that my property was private, not part of their HOA, and that any unauthorized entry would constitute trespassing. That evening, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter citing the county property records and warning against promoting unauthorized access to my property. I delivered copies to Patricia's house and the HOA office the next morning. Rather than backing down, Patricia escalated. By afternoon, new flyers had appeared, these ones specifying that the pool party was by HOA invitation only and claiming that proper arrangements have been made with relevant authorities. This was getting out of hand. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to address the issue directly. The meeting was held in the Sycamore Hills Community Center, a sterile room with uncomfortable chairs arranged in rows facing a small podium. About 30 residents were present when I walked in, many giving me curious glances. Patricia sat at the front table with 4 other board members, her expression souring when she spotted me. I signed up for the public comment period and waited. My turn. When my name was called, I approached the microphone with my folder of documentation. "Good evening," I began. "I'm Michael Chen, owner of the property at 1542 Creek Road. I'm here because your HOA has been issuing notices to my property and is now planning an event at my private residence without permission." Murmurs spread through the room. Some residents looked confused, others seemed embarrassed. "I have county documentation confirming my property is not part of Sycamore Hills," I continued, holding up the paperwork. "Any event planned at my address is unauthorized, and I formally request that you cancel this so-called community pool party immediately." Patricia leaned forward into her microphone. "Mr. Chen, while your property may technically fall outside our official boundary, your usage of resources affects our entire community." "That's not how property law works," I countered. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "During this unprecedented drought, private hoarding of water resources is irresponsible. The board has determined that community access to existing water features is in the public interest." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You have no legal authority to determine usage of my private property, regardless of drought conditions." A man in the back spoke up. "Is it true your pool uses less water than our lawns? Because that's what I heard." Patricia banged her gavel. "We're not discussing technical specifications. The issue is community standards and resource allocation." "The issue," I corrected, "is trespassing and misrepresentation. If this event isn't cancelled immediately, I'll be forced to take legal action." "We'll take your concerns under advisement," Patricia said dismissively, already looking at the next item on her agenda. As I left the meeting, I overheard snippets of conversation, some residents questioning Patricia's approach, others seemingly convinced I was selfishly hoarding resources during a drought. The next morning, I found a revised flyer on my windshield. The pool party was still scheduled, but now featured an additional note: "Help us welcome our neighbor to the greater Sycamore Hills community." My private pool had just been declared public property, and I had 3 days to stop an invasion of my home. Saturday arrived with perfect pool party weather, clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and temperatures climbing into the mid-90s. I'd spent the previous day installing additional security cameras, placing "no trespassing" signs at regular intervals around my property, and contacting both the sheriff's department and my attorney. The sheriff had promised to send a deputy if there was a disturbance, but warned me that without a court order, they couldn't prevent people from attending an event they believed was legitimate. I stood at my kitchen window, hoping Patricia had come to her senses. Maybe the signs and formal warnings would be enough. Maybe the more reasonable HOA members had talked her down. Those hopes evaporated at exactly 1:15 p.m. when 3 SUVs pulled up to my gate. Patricia stepped out of the lead vehicle, clipboard in hand, dressed in a designer sundress with a Sycamore Hills HOA cap perched on her head. 4 men in matching polo shirts began unloading folding tables, coolers, and boxes of decorations. I immediately went outside, cell phone recording in my hand. "Patricia, this is private property. You and your people need to leave immediately." She barely glanced at me, checking something off her list. "We have everything under control, Mr. Chen. The community access easement allows us to conduct neighborhood functions here." "There is no community access easement," I said firmly. "You're trespassing and I'm asking you to leave." She sighed dramatically and pulled a document from her clipboard. "This county filing clearly shows a recreational easement along this property." She thrust a paper toward me. I scanned it quickly, immediately spotting the problem. "This is for Lot 156. My property is Lot 178. This easement doesn't apply here." Patricia waved dismissively. "Technicalities. The intent of the original developer was clearly to provide community access to water features." Meanwhile, her crew continued setting up, bringing in tables, chairs, and even a portable speaker system. They moved with practiced efficiency, ignoring my presence entirely. I called the sheriff's department. "I have people trespassing on my property right now, setting up for an unauthorized event." The dispatcher promised to send someone, but couldn't guarantee immediate response due to a multi-car accident on the highway. Frustrated, I called my attorney, who advised taking video evidence and avoiding physical confrontation. By 1:45 p.m., the setup was nearly complete. Red and blue balloons tied to my fence posts fluttered in the breeze. A welcome to the community pool banner hung from my pool fence. Coolers filled with drinks sat on my patio table. "This is your final warning," I told Patricia. "You're trespassing on private property. I've contacted the authorities." She smiled thinly. "By all means, explain to the sheriff how you're denying community access during a drought emergency. I'm sure that will look wonderful in the papers, Mr. Water Commissioner." I froze. "What did you call me?" Her smile widened. "Oh, did you think I wouldn't research who my neighbors are?" Your position makes this situation even more interesting, doesn't it? Enforcing water restrictions while keeping a private pool all to yourself. Before I could respond, the first guests began arriving. Families with children in swimsuits, coolers in tow, streamed through my open gate. Patricia greeted them warmly, directing them toward the pool area. "The pool isn't open to the public," I announced loudly. "This is a private residence and you're all trespassing." A confused murmur ran through the crowd. One father approached me, concern on his face. "The flyer said this was a community pool event. Is there some mistake?" "Yes," I said emphatically. "This is my private home. The HOA has no authority to hold events here." The man looked toward Patricia, who was already addressing the growing crowd. "Don't worry, everyone. Mr. Chen is just getting used to the community sharing program. The board has approved this event, and everyone is welcome to enjoy the facilities." More people continued arriving. I counted at least 40 now, with more walking up from the development. Children were already dipping their feet in my pool, while parents set up chairs around the deck. When the deputy finally arrived nearly an hour later, the party was in full swing. Music blared from portable speakers. Nearly 100 people crowded my backyard, and the pool was filled with splashing children. Patricia had set up a command center at my patio table, directing operations like a general. The deputy surveyed the scene with obvious confusion. "Sir, can you explain what's happening here?" I led him away from the noise. "These people are trespassing. The HOA organized an event on my private property without permission. I've asked them to leave multiple times." Patricia quickly joined us, offering the deputy a dazzling smile and the same incorrect easement paperwork. "We're operating within our rights. This pool has been designated a community resource during the drought." "That's completely false," I countered. "I have county documentation proving this is private property with no public access easement." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "This seems like a civil dispute over property usage rights. Without a court order, I can't remove all these people, especially if they believe they have permission to be here." "They don't have permission," I insisted. "I'm the property owner and I'm telling you they don't have permission." "I understand, sir," the deputy said, "but I'd recommend getting a formal declaration from the county about the easement dispute. In the meantime, I'll stay to ensure there's no breach of peace." As he walked away, Patricia smiled triumphantly. "Enjoy the party, Mr. Chen. Your pool is making a lot of families happy today." I stood there watching strangers splash in my pool, trample my garden, and picnic on my lawn. Someone had accessed the pool equipment area and overridden my careful chemical balance settings. Children jumped into the deep end, ignoring all the safety rules I'd posted. An HOA volunteer was even giving tours of my water conservation system, explaining it completely incorrectly. By the time the sun began to set, I felt numb with anger and disbelief. 100 strangers had invaded my home, and there seemed to be nothing I could do about it. As the party finally wound down, I noticed something alarming. The pool water had turned a cloudy bluish-green, indicating someone had dumped massive amounts of chlorine into my carefully balanced system. Patricia was among the last to leave. As she gathered her clipboard and purse, she paused beside me. "The community thanks you for your contribution, Mr. Commissioner. We'll be posting the regular pool hours tomorrow." When I finally closed my gate behind the last intruder, I surveyed. The damaged, trampled gardens, litter everywhere, and my state-of-the-art pool system completely out of balance. But worst of all was the message Patricia had sent, that my property rights meant nothing against her authority. She had no idea what kind of fight she had just started. The morning after the invasion, I surveyed my property with growing fury. Empty soda cans floated in my once pristine pool. Trampled flower beds bordered the walkways, Cigarette butts littered the garden I'd carefully designed with drought-resistant native plants. But the superficial mess was just the beginning. I pulled on rubber gloves and tested the pool water, confirming my fears. Someone had dumped commercial-grade chlorine shock treatment directly into the system, bypassing the carefully calibrated filtration equipment. The pH levels were dangerously high, and the specialized biofilter I'd installed was completely compromised. "This will cost thousands to repair," I muttered, taking photos of the chemical damage. My phone rang. It was Alex from the Water Commission. "Michael? How bad was it?" he asked. Word had apparently spread about the HOA's pool party. "Worse than I imagined," I replied, describing the scene. "They overrode my filtration system and dumped enough chlorine to kill everything in a lake." "That's not just expensive, it's actually illegal," Alex said. "Those chemicals require proper handling and disposal. As commissioner, you should—" "I know," I cut him off, "but I want to handle this as a private citizen first. If I throw my title around, Patricia will just use it to paint me as abusing my position." After hanging up, I continued documenting everything. I downloaded footage from all security cameras, capturing the entire invasion from multiple angles. Patricia featured prominently, directing people to my equipment shed, instructing someone to adjust the pool chemistry, even giving a speech beside my pool about community resources. Most damning was the footage of her showing a young man how to override my pool control panel. "The settings are too conservative," she could be heard saying clearly. "We need proper sanitizing levels for public use." The control panel now displayed error messages across all systems. The biofilter would need complete replacement, and the water would have to be partially drained and recalibrated, a painful waste during drought conditions. A car pulled into my driveway, a silver BMW I didn't recognize. A middle-aged man in khaki shorts and a Sycamore Hills polo shirt approached tentatively. "Mr. Chen, I'm David Williams, treasurer of the Sycamore Hills HOA. I crossed my arms. "If you're here about scheduling another party, you can leave now." He held up his hands. "Actually, I came to apologize. Many of us on the board didn't fully understand the situation. Patricia told us you had agreed to a community pool arrangement." "She lied," I said flatly. "This is private property with no connection to your HOA." David looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I suspected as much after seeing how things unfolded yesterday. Some of us questioned the legality, but Patricia insisted everything was properly arranged." "Well, it wasn't." I gestured to the damage around us. "And now I'm looking at thousands in repairs." David surveyed the aftermath with growing horror. "This is completely unacceptable. I had no idea they tampered with your equipment. I have it all on video," I said, "including Patricia directing people to override my system." He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I can't speak officially for the board, but I want you to know not all of us support Patricia's methods. Some of us are quite concerned about potential liability here." After David left, I called Janet Ramirez, an attorney who specialized in property disputes. She arrived an hour later, impeccably dressed despite the weekend, and walked the property with me, taking notes as I explained everything. "This is straightforward trespassing and property damage," she said, after reviewing my documentation. "The fact that you repeatedly denied permission and they came anyway makes this a clear-cut case." "Will I need a court order to prevent them from coming back?" I asked. Janet nodded. "I'll file for an emergency injunction first thing Monday morning. In the meantime, document everything, especially any further contact from the HOA." She paused by the pool equipment. "This chemical dumping is particularly concerning. Given the environmental implications, we could potentially involve state environmental protection agencies." "I'd rather keep this as a straightforward property dispute if possible," I said. "Understood," Janet replied, "but keep all options open. Sometimes pressure from multiple angles is effective in these situations." After Janet left, I began the painful process of assessing each damaged system. The specialty controllers for my water conservation system were completely fried. Patricia's volunteer had apparently bypassed surge protectors to connect equipment that drew too much power. The automated cover mechanism was jammed with toys and debris someone had shoved into the tracks. As I worked, I noticed a car slowly driving past my property. It was Patricia, phone held up as if taking pictures. When she saw me watching, she accelerated away. An hour later, my own phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the HOA's lawyer, a formal letter claiming my pool violated multiple county ordinances and posed a public health risk requiring community intervention. Attached was a demand that I either bring the pool into community compliance standards or decommission it entirely. The letter cited my position as water commissioner, claiming I had ethical obligations to share resources during the drought emergency. It was a blatant attempt to use my professional position against me. I forwarded the email to Janet, adding it to our growing file of evidence. Then I spotted something disturbing in the legal letter, specific details about my pool's filtration system that weren't public knowledge, information that could only have come from someone who had access to my equipment shed. Just how far had Patricia's snooping gone? I immediately changed the locks on all exterior doors and ordered a new security system with motion sensors. That evening, I received a text from Thomas, my Sycamore Hills neighbor. Emergency HOA meeting called for tomorrow. Patricia pushing for pool access schedule and special assessment for community water feature maintenance. Several of us questioning, "This? Thought you should know." I thanked him for the information, then sat down at my computer. If Patricia wanted to make this about my role as water commissioner, perhaps it was time to examine Sycamore Hill's own water compliance history. I had avoided using my professional access until now, but Patricia had crossed a line. What I found made me sit back in stunned disbelief. Sycamore Hills hadn't just been bending water restriction rules, they'd been flagrantly violating them for years. And the property with the highest consistent violations, a familiar address, Patricia Wilcox's perfectly manicured estate, with its lush green lawn and ornamental fountains. Monday morning found me in my office at the Water Commission, reviewing files I'd never expected to use for personal reasons. I'd always maintained a strict separation between my professional position and private life, but Patricia had forced my hand by explicitly mentioning my role as commissioner in her legal threats. "These consumption reports are interesting," Alex said, leaning over my shoulder as we scrolled through Sycamore Hill's water usage data. "Interesting is one word for it," I replied. "Criminal might be another." The numbers told a damning story. While the rest of the county had reduced water consumption by 27% during the drought, Sycamore Hills had actually increased usage by 15%. The HOA had applied for and received multiple temporary exemptions for new landscaping projects, but satellite imagery showed no such projects existed, just consistently green lawns despite watering restrictions. Patricia's property alone used enough water last month to support 5 average households, Alex noted, pointing to a particular spike in the data. I nodded grimly. And look at these timestamps. Watering occurring between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., exactly when the restrictions explicitly prohibit it. We compiled a comprehensive report documenting 3 years of violations. Under normal circumstances, these would trigger warnings, then fines, and eventually mandatory water audits. But somehow Sycamore Hills had avoided scrutiny through a series of cleverly worded variance requests and incomplete reporting. At noon, I received a call from Janet. "Good news. The judge granted our emergency injunction. The HOA is legally barred from entering your property pending a full hearing." "That's something at least," I said, forwarding her the water compliance data. "You might find this useful for our case." Janet whistled as she reviewed the documents. "This changes our approach considerably. They're not just trespassing, they're hypocrites of the highest order." "I'd like to keep my commissioner role separate if possible," I reminded her. "Understood, but these are public records showing systematic violations. The fact that you happen to be commissioner is incidental to their non-compliance." After lunch, I was surprised by a visit from Erica Hayes, a reporter from the county newspaper. She'd covered water commission policies before, always thoroughly and fairly. "Commissioner Chen, I'm hearing rumors about an HOA commandeering your private property for a pool party." Her raised eyebrow indicated she found the story hard to believe. I sighed. "Unfortunately, it's true, though I'd prefer to handle this as a private citizen." That ship may have sailed, Erica replied, showing me her tablet. The Sycamore Hills HOA just issued a press release about community resource sharing during drought conditions, featuring photos of your pool. The pictures showed children splashing happily in my pool, with Patricia smiling benevolently in the foreground. The caption praised the HOA's innovative approach to water conservation through communal access to existing facilities. My jaw clenched. Those photos were taken on my private property during an unauthorized trespass that resulted in significant damage. Erica's eyes widened. They damaged your property? For the next 30 minutes, I detailed the events, showing her my documentation and the injunction. I explained how my pool was actually designed to use less water than traditional pools, and how the chemical dumping had compromised those conservation features. This is quite a story, Erica said, taking rapid notes. Commissioners conservation focused. Pool hijacked by water-wasting HOA. Mind if I send a photographer to document the damage? After Erica left, I received an urgent call from the Commission's Public Affairs Director. Michael, have you seen the HOA's press release? The chairman's office is getting questions about your pool and whether commissioners are exempt from water restrictions. I explained the situation, emphasizing that my pool was fully compliant and had been filled before restrictions took effect. We need to get ahead of this, she advised. Patricia Wilcox just called, requesting an emergency variance for neighborhood pool operations during the drought, essentially asking permission to continue using your pool. That's absurd, I sputtered. She has no authority over my property. Obviously, we'll deny the request, but she's clearly trying to create confusion in the public eye. By late afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond my private property dispute. 3 news outlets had contacted the Commission about the community pool controversy. Social media buzzed with partial information, some painting me as a water-hoarding hypocrite, others defending my property rights. I called Janet to update her on the media attention. Patricia's trying to control the narrative. We need to respond strategically. Agreed. I've been reviewing those water usage reports you sent. The violations are significant enough to trigger a formal commission investigation. I'd need to recuse myself from any official action, I noted. Of course, but the data speaks for itself. It might be time to let the official process work while we pursue our civil case. At 5 o'clock, I received notification that the Commission's Enforcement Division had opened a preliminary investigation into Sycamore Hills water usage patterns. Standard procedure when violations reach a certain threshold. It would have happened regardless of my situation, but the timing couldn't have been better. I was preparing to leave when my phone rang. An unknown number. Mr. Chen. This is Gregory Simmons, Vice President of the Sycamore Hills HOA. His voice was tense. We've just been notified about a water commission investigation into our neighborhood. That's correct, I confirmed. Significant compliance issues were identified through routine monitoring. This feels retaliatory, he suggested. Carefully. The data speaks for itself, Mr. Simmons, just as my property deed speaks for itself regarding your HOA's trespassing. He cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss resolving both matters amicably. Patricia may have been overzealous in her community resource approach. Overzealous is breaking into my yard and hosting a party, I replied, dumping unauthorized chemicals into my pool system and causing thousands in damages goes well beyond that. If we could meet, any discussion should go through my attorney, I interrupted, providing Janet's contact information. As I drove home, I noticed unusual activity at the Sycamore Hills Community Center. Cars filling the parking lot, residents streaming inside. An emergency meeting, most likely. Word of the water investigation was spreading. When I arrived home, I found a white envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a handwritten note. This isn't over. Your precious pool won't last the summer. I photographed the note, added it to my evidence file, and reinforced my security system. If Patricia thought threats would intimidate me, she'd seriously misjudged her opponent. I'd spent my career dealing with water rights disputes between cities and agricultural districts. Facing down an overreaching HOA president was straightforward by comparison. That evening, Erica's article went live on the newspaper's website. Water Wars HOA claims right to private pool owned by State Water Commissioner. The piece was factual and balanced, but the comments section exploded with opinions from both sides. As I reviewed the article, a notification popped up on my computer, an email from a name I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Evidence of Patricia Wilcox's real agenda." Cautiously, I opened the attachment to find internal HOA emails discussing plans to acquire my property through legal pressure and convert it to a genuine community facility. Patricia's own words damned her. "Once we establish usage rights, the property value will plummet. We can acquire it for pennies on the dollar and expand our community footprint." I immediately forwarded the email to Janet. The counterattack wasn't just beginning, it had just gained powerful new ammunition. The next morning, I awoke to my phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Erica's article had been picked up by larger news outlets, transforming my private property dispute into a symbol of water politics during the drought. The headline on the regional news site read, "Drought Drama, HOA Commandeers Water Commissioner's Conservation-Focused Pool." I scrolled through the comments, finding the public deeply divided. Some saw me as a hypocrite with a private pool during water restrictions, while others defended basic property rights against HOA overreach. Neither side had the complete picture. My doorbell rang at 8:30 a.m., a news van was parked at my curb, and a reporter stood on my porch with a cameraman hovering behind her. "Commissioner Chen, could we get your response to the Sycamore Hills HOA's statement that your pool violates drought emergency guidelines?" I politely declined to comment, directing them to the official commission statement that had been released earlier that morning, clarifying that my pool was fully compliant with regulations and had been installed before restrictions took effect. As I closed the door, my phone rang. It was Janet. "The whistleblower emails are authentic," she said without preamble. "I've verified them with a second HOA board member who's been uncomfortable with Patricia's actions. He's willing to testify that this was always about acquiring your land, not water conservation." "That changes things," I replied. "How do we proceed?" "I've amended our complaint to include evidence of coordinated harassment and conspiracy. Also, the judge has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning regarding the property violations." Mid-morning, 3 more news crews had arrived. From my window, I could see Patricia giving interviews near the Sycamore Hills entrance, gesturing dramatically toward my property. She was dressed in drought-appropriate earth tones, a calculated visual contrast to her usual designer outfits. At noon, the Water Commission released the preliminary findings of its investigation into Sycamore Hills water usage. The dry regulatory language couldn't disguise the damning facts: systematic violation of watering restrictions, falsified usage reports, and unauthorized water features throughout the development. The report specifically noted that Patricia Wilcox's property used 340% more water than permitted under current restrictions, with most usage occurring during prohibited daytime hours. Her ornamental fountains alone, now hastily turned off, had consumed enough water in the past month to serve 4 typical households. By 2 p.m., the narrative had shifted dramatically. Local news chyrons now read, "HOA President accused of massive water violations while targeting Commissioner's compliant pool." Social media erupted with side-by-side images: Patricia's lush, overwatered estate versus my modest conservation-designed property. Thomas texted me from within Sycamore Hills, residents furious about possible fines from water violations. Patricia called emergency meeting, but it's turning against her. Several people demanding her resignation. At 4 p.m., I received a call from Gregory Simmons, the HOA vice president. "This has gotten completely out of hand," he said, sounding stressed. "Patricia assured us we had legal grounds to access your property. Now we're facing water violation fines and potential lawsuits. You should have verified her claims before trespassing on my property and damaging my equipment," I replied evenly. "The board wants to resolve this quickly," he continued. "Patricia's actions weren't authorized to the extent she took them. We're prepared to cover damages and issue a public apology." "That's a start," I acknowledged, "but I'll need to consult with my attorney." As evening approached, Erica called requesting a formal interview. Against Janet's advice, I agreed to meet her at my property, where she could document the damage firsthand. What many people don't understand, I explained as we walked around the pool, is that this system was designed specifically to minimize water usage. It recaptures evaporation, uses minimal chemicals, and requires less water than traditional pools. Erica nodded, taking notes. And the HOA's claims about water waste? I showed her the monitoring system, now partially repaired. This tracks every drop. My quarterly water usage is actually below the average for a property this size without a pool. Yet Patricia Wilcox's property uses more than triple its water allocation. Those are the Commission's findings, yes. As Erica was leaving, we noticed a car driving slowly past my house. Patricia again, now openly monitoring my property despite the injunction. When she saw the news reporter, she quickly accelerated away. She seems determined, Erica observed. Desperate is more like it, I replied. The board is turning against her, and the water violations carry significant penalties. That evening, the local news featured side-by-side segments. My calm, factual interview juxtaposed with Patricia's increasingly defensive claims about community needs and resource sharing. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Just before midnight, Thomas sent a final text. Emergency vote held tonight. Patricia suspended from HOA presidency pending investigation. Gregory Simmons taking over temporarily. Mandatory compliance with water restrictions effective immediately. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, but remained vigilant. Patricia had been suspended, not removed. And in my experience, people who abuse authority rarely surrender it gracefully. The most dangerous moment in confronting a bully isn't the initial challenge. It's when they realize they're losing control. Patricia had just entered that phase, and I suspected her most desperate actions were yet to come. The county courthouse stood imposing against the clear blue sky, its limestone facade gleaming in the morning sun. I arrived early, dressed in my most professional suit, files organized in a leather portfolio. Janet met me on the courthouse steps, projecting the calm confidence of someone who knew she held the winning hand. "How are you feeling?" she asked as we walked through security. "Ready to end this," I replied. "Any last-minute developments?" "2 more board members have submitted affidavits supporting our case," Janet said, "and the water violation report has been entered into evidence, though the judge may consider it peripheral to the property dispute." Courtroom 3B was already crowded when we entered. Local media occupied the back row, while several Sycamore Hills residents filled the left side of the gallery. I recognized Thomas and David Williams among them, along with other homeowners who had reached out with apologies after learning the full story. At precisely 9:01 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order as Judge Eleanor Brennan entered. A veteran, jurist with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, she scanned the room with sharp eyes before taking her seat. "Chen versus Sycamore Hills Homeowners Association," the clerk announced. "Emergency injunction hearing regarding property rights and damages." Patricia arrived moments later with her attorney, sliding into her seat without acknowledging anyone. Her usual confident demeanor had been replaced by a tense rigidity. She wore a conservative navy suit, her previous flashy style conspicuously absent, a calculated attempt to appear serious and professional. Judge Brennan began by establishing the facts. As I understand it, the plaintiff, Michael Chen, alleges that the defendants organized and conducted an unauthorized event on his private property, resulting in trespassing and property damage. "That's correct, Your Honor," Janet confirmed, rising smoothly. "And the defense contends that their actions were justified by what exactly?" The judge directed her question to Patricia's attorney, a nervously sweating man named Harold Finch. "Your Honor, the Sycamore Hills HOA believed they were acting within community guidelines to address resource allocation during a drought emergency," Finch began. "There was a good faith belief that an easement existed," Judge Brennan interrupted. "Do you have documentation of this alleged easement?" "We have an easement for Lot 156, which we believed encompassed. Mr. Chen's property is Lot 178, the judge stated flatly. "Are you suggesting the HOA cannot read a property map?" Finch tugged at his collar. There was some confusion about the boundaries. Confusion, Judge Brennan repeated skeptically. Let's see the evidence of this confusion. Janet presented our case methodically, starting with the county property records clearly showing my land was separate from Sycamore Hills. She displayed the progression of harassment, from initial violation notices to the party flyers, and finally, security footage of the trespass itself. The courtroom fell silent as the video played, showing Patricia directing people onto my property, overriding my pool system, and making dismissive comments about my objections. When the footage showed her instructing someone to dump chemicals into my filtration system, several gasps echoed through the room. These actions resulted in over $17,000 in damages to specialized equipment, Janet explained, submitting the repair estimates. Equipment specifically designed for water conservation. When it was the defense's turn, Finch attempted to shift focus to the drought emergency. In these unprecedented conditions, communities must share resources, he argued. Mr. Chen's position as water commissioner creates an ethical obligation. Objection, Janet interrupted. Mr. Chen's professional position is irrelevant to his property rights. Sustained, Judge Brennan ruled. Unless you're suggesting water commissioners forfeit their constitutional protections, Counselor. Finch backpedaled quickly. No, Your Honor, but there was genuine concern about private water features during restrictions. Then perhaps, the judge responded dryly, your clients should have addressed their own violations first. She held up the Water Commission report. I've reviewed this documentation showing Sycamore Hills' systematic non-compliance with the very restrictions they claim to be enforcing. Patricia whispered urgently to her attorney, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Your Honor, he tried again, Ms. Wilcox was acting in what she believed was the community's interest. Judge Brennan's expression hardened. Mr. Finch, I've reviewed the internal emails submitted as evidence. They clearly indicate Ms. Wilcox's intent to use harassment to devalue Mr. Chen's property for potential acquisition. Are you suggesting those were also motivated by community interest? The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Many Sycamore Hills. Residents turned to stare at Patricia, who maintained a rigid posture, eyes fixed straight ahead. When Patricia finally took the stand, her testimony contradicted both the video evidence and her previous public statements. She claimed she had misunderstood the property boundaries and had been invited to use the pool, assertions immediately disproven by my recorded warnings and the formal cease and desist letters. So to be clear, Judge Brennan asked, visibly struggling to maintain her judicial composure, you believed Mr. Chen invited you to use his pool, which is why you created flyers announcing a community pool party without consulting him. Patricia's facade finally cracked. He was hoarding resources during a drought emergency. People with pools should share them when others can't water their lawns. While you maintained 3 fountains and watered daily during prohibited hours, the judge countered. The hearing concluded after just 3 hours. Judge Brennan's ruling was decisive and comprehensive. The court finds overwhelmingly in favor of the plaintiff, she announced. The temporary injunction is made permanent, barring any Sycamore Hills HOA member from entering Mr. Chen's property without explicit written permission. She continued. The court orders the HOA to pay all repair costs for the damaged equipment, plus $25,000 in punitive damages for the willful and malicious nature of the trespass. Finally, she addressed Patricia directly. Ms. Wilcox, your actions demonstrate a disturbing disregard for property rights and legal boundaries. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges regarding the property damage and documented conspiracy. As we left the courtroom, reporters clustered around us, but it was the group of Sycamore Hills residents who approached me first. We had no idea what she was doing, one woman said. We're so sorry for what happened to your property. Patricia pushed through the crowd, face flushed with anger. This isn't over, she hissed as she passed. You've made enemies of the entire neighborhood. David Williams overheard and stepped forward. No, Patricia, you did that all on your own. The day after the hearing, Sycamore Hills erupted into chaos. Thomas called me early that morning, his voice urgent. "You won't believe what's happening," he said. "There's an emergency meeting at the community center tonight. People are furious, not at you, at Patricia." "What changed?" I asked, surprised by the shift. "The judge's ruling hit everyone hard, but it was those emails that really did it. Her plans to devalue your property to force you out. Now people are asking what else she's been hiding." By noon, my inbox contained a dozen messages from Sycamore Hills residents, some apologizing for the HOA's actions, others asking for advice about water conservation. The tide had turned dramatically. That evening I stood in my kitchen watching through binoculars as cars filled the community center parking lot. Though tempted to attend the meeting, I knew my presence would only complicate matters. This was something the community needed to resolve internally. Thomas provided live updates via text Ponro 5 p.m. Standing room only. Never seen this many people at an HOA meeting. 12 p.m. Gregory called meeting to order. Patricia tried to take over, but board refused. 20 p.m. Financial review underway. Discovering Patricia approved $15K in legal contingency without full board vote. The revelations continued throughout the evening. Patricia had apparently been running the HOA like a personal fiefdom, selectively enforcing rules against homeowners she disliked, waiving violations for allies, and misappropriating funds for pet projects without proper approval. 15 p.m. Homeowner presenting evidence that Patricia has been using HOA maintenance staff for work on her personal property. 32 p.m. Patricia just claimed judge was biased. Room erupted. Gregory had to call for order. The most damning revelation came around 9 p.m. The HOA treasurer had conducted an emergency audit and discovered Patricia had created a property acquisition fund using money that should have gone toward community landscaping. The fund's purpose, according to uncovered documents, was to pressure non-conforming adjacent properties, meaning my land and 2 other holdouts that had refused to join the HOA. 41. Vote of no confidence proposed. Patricia screaming about witch hunts. 55 in size p.m. Vote complete. 96% voted to remove Patricia from board permanently. She's out. Thomas called me immediately after the meeting adjourned. "You should have seen her face when the vote was announced," he said, barely containing his excitement. Complete shock. She really believed she was untouchable. "What happens now?" I asked. "Gregory takes over as interim president. The board is drafting a formal apology to you and several other homeowners Patricia targeted. And there's something else. They want to know if you'd be willing to consult on a water conservation plan for the neighborhood." I laughed in disbelief. "That's quite a turnaround. People are scared about the water violations. The potential fines could bankrupt the HOA fund. They're hoping your expertise might help mitigate the damage." The next morning, I received an email from the newly reorganized board with a formal apology and an invitation to discuss water conservation strategies. Attached was a copy of the official board resolution permanently removing Patricia from any HOA position. Around noon, my security cameras captured Patricia marching up to the borders of my property, cell phone in hand. She looked disheveled, her usually perfect appearance noticeably frayed around the edges. She paced the boundary line, occasionally pointing toward my house and speaking angrily into her phone, careful not to step onto my land in violation of the injunction. That afternoon, a delivery truck arrived with a large package from the Sycamore Hills HOA. Inside was a water-efficient garden ornament and a handwritten note from Gregory. A small token of apology. Many of us would like to make amends. I was considering how to respond when Janet called with news. "The district attorney is pursuing criminal charges against Patricia," she said. "Willful destruction of property and conspiracy to commit fraud based on those emails about devaluing your land." "That seems excessive for a neighborhood dispute," I remarked, surprising myself with a twinge of sympathy for Patricia. "It's not just about you anymore," Janet explained. "The DA's office has received similar complaints from 2 other neighborhoods where Patricia served on HOA boards before moving to Sycamore Hills. This appears to be a pattern of behavior." As evening approached, I noticed unusual activity at Patricia's house. A small moving truck was parked in her driveway, and workers carried boxes to and fro. Was she actually leaving? Thomas confirmed it with a text. Patricia listed her house this afternoon. Asking price is 20% below market value. She wants out fast. The community's final blow to Patricia came that night. The same neighbors who had once feared her authority gathered on her front lawn, not with pitchforks and torches, but with water usage reports and screenshots of her emails. They stood in silent protest as she emerged to scream at them to leave. Someone had brought a large sign reading "Water Waster" with an arrow pointing directly at her house. By morning, Patricia's moving truck was gone, along with her luxury SUV. The "For Sale" sign on her lawn had been hastily amended with a handwritten note, "Price to sell immediately." The neighborhood that Patricia had ruled through fear and intimidation had finally found its voice, and used it to decisively reject her leadership. The community hadn't just revolted, it had reclaimed its soul. 1 month after the hearing, I stood beside my fully restored pool watching the sun set over tranquil waters. The specialized filtration system hummed efficiently, water chemistry perfectly balanced once again. New native plants bordered the deck, replacing those trampled. During the invasion, the physical wounds to my property had healed, though the memory remained. My phone buzzed with a message from Gregory. Board meeting went well. Water conservation plan unanimously approved. Thank you for your guidance. I smiled, reflecting on how completely the situation had transformed. 3 weeks ago, I'd presented a comprehensive water management strategy to the Sycamore Hills HOA, the same organization that had once tried to commandeer my pool. The plan included xeriscaping common areas, installing smart irrigation systems, and implementing tiered water pricing to discourage excessive use. The Water Commission had been impressed by the community's voluntary compliance measures, reducing the original fine by 60% in recognition of their good faith efforts. My recusal from all decisions regarding Sycamore Hills ensured transparency, though some still grumbled about special treatment. As evening shadows lengthened, a small group approached my front gate. Gregory, Thomas, and several other Sycamore Hills residents I'd come to know during the reconciliation process. Right on time, I called out, opening the gate to welcome them. "We brought housewarming gifts," Gregory said, holding up a basket filled with water-efficient gardening tools, "and native plant seeds. Though technically I'm the one who stayed put," I laughed. Thomas handed me a framed document, the new Sycamore Hills HOA charter, with explicit language respecting property boundaries and prohibiting harassment of non-HOA neighbors. They'd named it the Good Neighbor Policy. "We're determined not to repeat past mistakes," Gregory explained. The board unanimously adopted these principles. We gathered on my patio where I'd set up refreshments. The conversation flowed easily as we discussed neighborhood improvements and water conservation successes. "Have you heard from Patricia?" I finally asked, the question that had lingered unspoken. Gregory exchanged glances with the others. She sold her house at a loss and moved to Arizona. Ironically, they have even stricter water restrictions there. The DA offered her a plea deal, Thomas added. Community service and restitution instead. Of criminal charges, she took it. I nodded, feeling a complicated mix of satisfaction and sympathy. Patricia had caused significant damage, yet her downfall seemed punishment enough. "What about your position as water commissioner?" asked Sarah, another board member. "Did this situation cause problems for you professionally?" "Initially, yes," I admitted. Some suggested I had conflicts of interest, but the chairman supported me throughout, especially once the facts became clear. In truth, the controversy had ultimately enhanced my professional standing. My personal experience had inspired a commission-wide review of HOA water policies, resulting in new guidelines for community water management during drought conditions. Sometimes the most effective policy changes emerge from personal conflicts. As dusk settled around us, I gave my visitors a tour of the rebuilt water system, explaining each conservation feature with pride. They asked thoughtful questions, genuinely, interested in understanding how similar principles could be applied at a community scale. "Would you consider joining our Environmental Advisory Committee?" Gregory asked as the tour concluded. "We could use your expertise and it would show everyone how committed we are to moving forward positively. The irony wasn't lost on me. Being invited to advise the very HOA that had once considered my property an obstacle. But the opportunity to transform an adversary into an ally was too meaningful to dismiss. I'd be happy to consult, I agreed, though I'll need to maintain some professional distance given my role at the commission. After my guests departed, I sat alone by the pool, reflecting on the journey. What had begun as a bitter property dispute had evolved into something constructive, a model for community water management that other neighborhoods were now seeking to emulate. Patricia's attempt to seize my property had backfired spectacularly, but the aftermath had created unexpected, positive change. Sycamore Hills was now on track to become one of the most water-efficient developments in the county. My own water conservation system, once the target of hostility, was now a teaching tool for sustainable residential design. The next morning brought one final piece of closure, a small envelope delivered by certified mail. Inside was a handwritten note from Patricia. I still believe communities should prioritize collective needs over individual desires, but I acknowledge my methods were wrong. The restitution payment is enclosed. Attached was a cashier's check covering the full cost of repairs to my property, an acknowledgement of responsibility I never expected to receive. I filed the check with my case documents, considering it less a financial compensation than a symbolic. Conclusion. The real victory wasn't in Patricia's downfall or even the restoration of my property. It was in the transformation of a community. As water commissioner, I'd always believed that sustainable resource management required both sound policy and community buy-in. What I hadn't anticipated was how my own personal conflict would demonstrate this principle so powerfully. My phone rang. The Water Commission chairman calling about our upcoming presentation to the County Board of Supervisors. The Sycamore Hills. Case study is generating significant interest, he said. Several other HOAs want to implement similar programs. I smiled, looking out at my peaceful pool. Sometimes the most difficult challenges lead to the most meaningful progress. By defending my private property, I'd inadvertently helped create a model for community conservation that would benefit many others, proof that protecting individual rights and serving the greater good aren't always in conflict. They can, with respect and good faith, reinforce each other beautifully.